Resourceful Designer, episode 289, Why You Should Stop Calling Yourself a Freelancer.
Welcome to the Resourceful Designer podcast, offering solutions to streamline your graphic and web design business so you can get back to designing. And now your host. He hates wearing turtlenecks. Mark DeCote.
Yep, always have. My mom used to make me wear them as a kid, and I always felt like they were strangling me. What can I say? I like my neck to breathe. Anyway, you're going to want to pay close attention to this episode, especially if you call yourself a freelancer. Because I'm going to dive deep into how that title could be hurting you, and I have evidence to back it up. But before I get to that, I want to give you an update on last week's episode. Last week, I talked about the lulls in our business, and I shared how the entire week went by without me having a single client project to work on. If you haven't listened to that episode, why don't you go back and give it a listen? But if you did listen to it, do you remember how I said I took some time to revamp my website proposal template before actually submitting a new proposal to a client? Well, not 10 minutes after I finished the recording, editing, and scheduling that episode, I received an email from the client accepting my offer. Not only that, but I had used the 3-tiered pricing system that I had talked about back in episode 145 of the podcast. And if you haven't heard that episode, I highly suggest you do. So many people have told me it changed the way they submit prices to their clients. Anyways, not only did the client accept my proposal, but they chose the 3rd tier that I presented them. So I went from not having any work to do at all to landing one of the biggest website projects I've ever had, and one that'll keep me busy for a few months. So, as I said last week, lulls never last. And now, why you should stop calling yourself a freelancer. A few weeks ago, the topic of what we should call ourselves came up in the Resourceful Designer community. By the way, if you want to join the community, visit resourcefuldesigner.com/community to learn more and to join. Well, this conversation started after a member shared their new website with us, and someone asked why they referred to themselves as a freelancer on their website. We then talked about the impression and the stereotypes associated with the word freelancer. And in the end, this designer acknowledged that it was in their best interests not to use the term freelancer when referring to themselves. But why, you may ask? It's because of the stigma associated with the term freelance or freelancer. Way back in episode 17 of the podcast, which came out over 6 years ago, so I'll forgive you if you don't remember it, I talked about how calling yourself a freelance graphic designer could hurt your business. In that episode, I shared a story of when a company approached me to work in-house for them. Now, I turned them down because I'm running my own business, but I did share a link with them to a resume website of a designer I knew. Somebody who I thought would be perfect for the job. Well, the CEO of the company later told me that the designer had all the qualifications they were looking for. However, her resume listed her as a freelance graphic designer, and they were looking for someone more serious than that. Now, I was shocked at the time. Because she had listed herself on her resume as a freelancer, she didn't get the job. She didn't even get an interview. I know, it's crazy, but it's true. You see, the term freelancer is widely known among designers. I remember back in the late 80s, early 90s when I was in college, my classmates and I talked about how great it would be to be a freelancer. But outside of our sphere of peers in the design industry, the term freelancer is not that common. Or maybe I should say, it's not as prestigious as we like to think it is. In fact, the term freelancer has the connotation of being quick and cheap. And if you remember episode 71 of the podcast, good design, quick design, cheap design, you can only pick two. Then that means that to many business people, freelancers are not people you want to hire if you want good design work. To them, freelancer equals quick and cheap. And that's why I always tell designers, especially those who work for themselves, to stop saying they're freelance designers and instead say that they run a design business, even if it's something you do from time to time as a side gig. In an article that I read by Andrew Holliday called Stop Calling Yourself a Freelancer, he said that a company commands more respect than a freelancer, and that freelancers are perceived as commodities, meaning they're interchangeable. If you need a quick design job, hire a freelancer. The next time you need something done, you could hire the same person if you want, or you can hire someone else. It really doesn't matter because freelancers are interchangeable. Any one of them will do. And usually, the cheaper, the better. Hiring a freelancer is kind of like filling up your gas tank. You know that the gas or petrol, whatever you want to call it, is basically the same at every station down the street. So you pick and choose where you're going to fill up your car based on the price. And that's how many business owners perceive freelancers, as commodities. However, if you want a partner to help you develop your brand and your marketing assets, someone you can work with long-term, then hire a design company, even if that company is made up of just one person. The other interesting point that Andrew made in his article is that freelancers often fight for hourly work, whereas companies normally get paid by the project. And therefore, your earning potential is much higher if you refer to yourself as a business owner and not as a freelancer. But don't take Andrew's or even my word for it. Earlier this week, I posted a poll in a large entrepreneurial community that I belong to. This is a community with several thousand people in it, and it's made up mostly of business owners, solopreneurs to, I'd say, mid-sized business owners. There's a couple of large business owners, but most people in there are either solopreneurs or mid-sized businesses. In other words, they're the type of people that you want as a design client. Now, here's what I asked. I posted a poll and I said, who would you prefer to hire for design work? A graphic designer who runs their own design business, or B, a freelance graphic designer? Now, I know it's a trick question since they're both essentially the same thing, but I wanted to see what they would say. Well, in just a few short days, 204 people responded to my poll. Out of that, 176 people chose A graphic designer who runs their own business, compared to only 28 people who chose B, a freelance graphic designer. What's even more interesting are the comments that they left on my post. Some of the things they said are, well, one person asked, aren't they the same thing? But if I had to choose, I would pick A. It sounds more professional. So this person acknowledges that both things I asked are the exact same thing, but given the choice, they would pick A because of the way it sounds. It sounds more professional to be a design business owner than it does to be a freelancer. Somebody else wrote, I would hire a freelance graphic designer. I'm just starting out and don't have a large budget, and option A sounds more expensive to me. So again, the first person thought that a design business owner sounded more professional. This person says that it sounds more expensive. Even though they're both the same person, the perceived value that the business owner gets is much higher from a design business owner than it is a freelancer. Now, here's an interesting one. Someone wrote, if I knew exactly what I wanted and just needed somebody to implement it for me, I would choose B, a freelancer. If I needed someone to help me develop new ideas, I would choose A. Wasn't that one interesting? So to this person, a freelancer is just a yes person, somebody that you say, I want you to design this exactly. You have the skills, I don't, do it. and the freelancer does it. Now, maybe you've taken on jobs like that before. I know I have, where the client knew exactly what they wanted. It's easy money. But this business owner wouldn't be expecting anything more than that from that freelancer, where they said if they needed somebody to help develop new ideas, then they would choose a design business owner. Wow, really interesting. Now, another comment on the poll is somebody asks, isn't hiring a freelancer kind of like hiring an employee who doesn't actually work for you, so it's less paperwork? So imagine how this person would treat you as a freelancer. They think that a freelancer is just an employee that has less paperwork. They just pay. They don't have to worry about all the other stuff involved with hiring an employee. But that means you're treated just like an employee. You're not given the respect that you deserve. Now, I love this comment. This person wrote, I think the difference between the two is confidence and trust. I could trust that a design business owner is competent and knows what they are doing because they took the time to start a business. I know they'll be around for a long time should I need them again in the future. I would not feel the same way about hiring a freelance graphic designer. Wow. How does that make you feel? This person thinks that because somebody is running a business, a design business owner, that automatically makes them more confident in what they do and more trustworthy. And the comment that they know that this person, because they started a business, they'll be around for a long time should they need them again in the future. And they don't feel that way about a freelancer because they don't know. And the last comment I'm going to share with you here is somebody wrote, I have a background in design and I chose A. Most freelancers I know are only doing it until they can find a full-time job. Wow. And there were many other comments, most of them along the same lines of these. So I didn't want to repeat the same thing over and over again. But they all came to a similar conclusion. If you want somebody who is cheap, someone that you can tell what to do, and if you're not interested in building a working relationship with them, then hire a freelancer. However, if you want somebody knowledgeable, someone who can help you solve the problems that you're facing, and someone reliable who'll be around for a long time, then hire a designer who runs their own business. I think this poll alone makes my point. But let me simplify it even more. And this following is just my opinion. It's the way I've always thought of the term freelance. Other people may disagree with you. Again, this is just how I see it. But the way I believe it is, if the projects that you work on are for someone other than the person or company paying you, then you are freelancing. So if you are contracted by an agency to work on a project for their clients, they, meaning the agency, hired you as a freelancer. They may or may not have an in-house designer, but they needed to hire you in order to fulfill their commitment to their clients. Now, this is regardless of whether or not you work directly with the client or if there's a go-between at the agency. If the client, the end person, the person you're actually designing the stuff for, is not the one paying you, then there's a good chance you're freelancing. However, if the client hires you directly to do the work for them, then you are not freelancing. You are running a design business. Take my podcast branding business, for example. I run a design business specializing in the podcast space. Podcasters hire me to design their artwork and their websites. That's not freelancing. But I'm also the designer for a large podcast agency. They send their clients to me for their podcast artwork. Now, for those projects, I'm working as a freelancer, since even though I'm working directly with the clients, it's the agency that pays me and not the clients themselves. Do you see the difference? Now, another thing to consider is if you charge fixed, project-based, or value-based pricing, then chances are you're running a design business, since most freelancers typically charge by the hour. Not all, but most. And finally, if you don't plan on ever having a boss to work under, you don't ever want to be an employee, then you are running a design business. You are not a freelancer. Now, in the end, you can call yourself whatever you want. It's your life after all. You run your design business as a freelancer, as a design business owner, whatever you want. I just hope that I gave you something to think about today. I know I was very surprised by the responses I got on my poll. Now, I did figure that design business owner would prevail over freelance designer. That wasn't a surprise. What surprised me was by how much, and how almost all the comments pointed to how people can trust and have more confidence in a design business owner than they could in a freelancer. And if these are the type of people, I'm talking about the people who replied to my poll, if these are the type of people who make up a good segment of our, what we consider an ideal client, then why not take heed to what they're saying? Call yourself a freelancer if you want, but if you take yourself seriously, and more importantly, if you want others to take you seriously, then why not drop that moniker and stop calling yourself a freelancer? And that's what I wanted to share with you today. Now, before I go, I just want to remind you of the Resourceful Designer community. If that design business that you say you run, if you're looking at growing it, improving it, just becoming a better business person, then the Resourceful Designer community is where you want to be. There is so much talent and people offering to help with advice and tips and resources and so much within the community that allows all members to prosper on their own. If that sounds like something that interests you, then head on over to resourcefuldesigner.com/community and join today. So that's it for me. I want to thank you for tuning in. Please, if you know a fellow designer who could benefit from listening to this podcast, maybe you know somebody who calls themselves a freelancer, pass on this episode and get them to listen to it. I would love for them to listen to the show. But that's it for me. Until next time, I am Mark Decote, wishing you all the best with your design business and reminding you to stay creative.
Thanks for listening to the Resourceful Designer podcast at resourcefuldesigner.com.